Good afternoon, Internet. Back from several, what is it, several weeks? It's been a month?
Oh yeah, I'd
It's
say
been a
so.
while. And
Several second breakfasts.
several second breakfasts later, Behind the Curve is back. We had a lot of busyness. I graduated from college. Uh,
I did not, but that's fine.
and we're back again to bore you to death and talk about our favorite things. And be a soothing background to whatever you happen to be doing, rather than looking at us.
I'm just
Alright.
glad finals are over.
Same. Oh my word.
We had our
Okay.
finals fantasy.
You mean the fantasy of being done?
Yes, the finals fantasy.
So therefore, I had five Final Fantasies, five finals. Ugh. So then, like,
Oh gosh.
but one of my finals was on fantasy. So that means my finals fantasy five.
Yes. Let's go with that.
Sweet. So how have you been, sir?
Yeah, doing pretty well. Trying to get a job at Chick-fil-A. Well, yeah, I guess no reason to hide that.
Hoop hoop.
I mean, like, someone's got to pay for the fast food somehow.
Amen to that, and pass the chicken. So we have gathered together today to talk about um, The Hobbit by J.R.R. Tolkien and its following movies and mythos. And that
Yeah,
is going to be the topic that we are going to discuss today for our return to the realms of fantasy, literature, and rambling.
I think this is the book I've actually read the most, like 5 times back, like when I was a kid. I also read like the graphic novel that they had, like the library near me had it, so
Oh,
I
I
was
know
like,
that.
oh, this is
I have
cool.
that. I have that.
Oh, you actually own it?
Yeah, I do.
Wow, okay, that's
I
cool.
think it's the same one.
Yeah, actually, it probably is because it's one copy that I know of.
Very watercolory.
Oh yeah, like
Okay.
two might have been a '90s. I don't know.
I remember that. I liked that one. That was a nice graphic novel. All right, so we are here to. So why don't you kick us off here?
Well, maybe with the movies like coming also into the book, like I don't think it deserved to be a trilogy because like I don't think most people realize, even to those who did read the book, it was kind of intended as like a fairy tale, like a children's novel that like was to be read at like bedtime, chapter time. I don't know.
Yeah, no, but that makes a ton of sense. Like that's just like diving right into it. That I know that is one of the biggest criticisms of the movies that they didn't deserve to be a trilogy, and I firmly agree. It was. I
People are
think
like, oh my gosh, like chapter books are read to children. Like what is this?
it's like can we turn Thomas the Tank Engine into a three-part epic trilogy?
In 100 years, they'll say that. So,
You can certainly try.
Steampunk Thomas the Tank Engine, I would watch that.
Out of curiosity, I think I would watch too. As long as Ringo Starr narrated. Ringo Starr was the best narrator.
The pre
Baldwin.
CGI years.
Yeah, no. Seriously though, Ringo was a good narrator. Not Sean Baldwin. Not, but I just call him Sean Baldwin. You know how Alec Baldwin also narrated. I didn't like
Alec
him.
Baldwin.
Wasn't that was it Stephen Baldwin? I don't know. It was one of the Baldwins. I didn't like that person as the narrator. But Ringo. Ringo was best narrator. Sorry, see now we're now see this is we're wondering now.
Yes.
So
Does that mean, by the way, that like Zayn Malik is gonna be like some children's narrator in 30 years?
I don't know. Well, see that you I don't know because like rock stars, pop stars, they're different animals.
Today? Oh, yeah. I
Oh
mean, oh, in
yes.
general.
Oh, just in general. All right. So you and the Hobbit. So it didn't deserve to be a three-parter. So what was the problem with making it a three-parter?
Well, I think that like you gotta look for like what Tolkien intended. Like, I have a great quote from J.G. Keeley that like I feel that for the movie kind of worked the extended part with like the Lord of the Rings, but it didn't work at the same time because with Lodar, what he's going for was detail, was trying to replicate an ancient document with Lord of the Rings and what it wanted to teach. In the words of Keeley, epics have often serves as a cycle page for the age, ancient epics,
Hmm.
teaching history, morals, law, myth, geography. This was the purpose of all of Tolkien's long, dull songs, the lineage of troop movements, the lines of lineage, snippets of didactic myths, and side adventures to create a realistically deep and complicated world, but he felt he needed to include as many diverging views as original myths had. But I cannot defend the idea the Hobbit needed to be epic or like an organic part of Lord of the Rings, because I think it doesn't work. So I thought the Hobbit felt like it represented a simple time in Middle Earth. That's also why I don't think. Sorry, I'm ranting.
Okay,
Like
okay,
the side part where like Sauron's in it, because it's like, well, this is decades before Fellowship of the Ring. Like
yes.
something like 50 years or something. So it's like it's a simpler time. It's not like this dark epic trilogy. You know what I'm saying here?
Oh yeah, no, it's no, I definitely hear.
Like
So
Lord of the Rings, it's trying to be an epic versus a children's fairy tale, like for real.
you're right. I think that there is a different like outside of them taking place in the same world, and I think sharing some characters and sharing almost a similar growth of a hero. Actually, the growth of a hero is very different because I do not consider The Hobbit to be a heroic story. It's definitely not. Um, but
And
no,
I
you're
do like
right.
the Hobbit's sense of well, not editing, but like the way it's presented. Like you might have a song, but it's like again, it's not like trying to be an epic that's trying to teach people non-literate people like you know this stuff with all these troop movements and stuff. It's just like it's simpler, but at the same time, it's not deep. And I don't know. I'm not a fan of Tolkien, but
I know you're not, and I think that that is one point we're going to diverge against is the how much immersion is too much immersion thing. Whereas I think you're like, oh, it doesn't matter. This stuff doesn't matter. Versus I would say because again this comes down to the whole is it like the if you're writing a fictional history like if you're attempting to do something on the scale of Tolkien, yeah, I think it's completely reasonable that you would think about. I think see, and that's again postmodern view versus it's constructionist versus deconstructionist. Deconstructionism is the more modern view; it's more in line with postmodernism. Versus constructionism is a much more classical view that's a lot more in line with fantasy. Fantasy is either inherently constructionist or deconstructionist, and the tradition has always been constructionist because you are building. You're usually building something. You're building a fantasy world. You're building a world, and in that world, you ought to think about like, well, these people are from here. What should they eat? What do they eat? What do they smoke? What do they talk about at dinner? That's to me that's logical. I understand that people would think it was boring, and you're right. It isn't necessary to the story. But if
well,
you
was Tolkien a modernist?
No, he was
Uh,
not. He was not a modernist.
Well, I would consider romanticist modernist if you don't mind me saying because of just the time frame. But
I,
what are
I
you gonna
would.
argue for?
I would disagree because they're diametrically opposed movements. Well, I wouldn't say they're diametrically opposed. That'd be say industrialism and
Oh yes,
romanticism are
and I think
opposed.
he was truly, even though he said his work wasn't an epic, that like his Saruman, for example, was kind of an allegory for the industrialization of England and like the Ents and the trees are disappearing and all that, which is definitely a romantic flavor.
That's
I just
true.
say much so myself.
He does have of certain things. There is a there's an yeah there's a decent amount of Anglo Catholicism evolved in his mythology, which is to be thoroughly expected. And I think there is definitely a romantic view. If you look at his idea of creation, it is a highly romantic view, which I
It's more this Silmarillion, but yeah, I don't know. You think it's in the Lord of the Rings too?
oh absolutely yeah no I think more in the Silmarillion, but I think in the Lord of the Rings you do see there is a romantic, and there are some definitely some neoclassical, there are ancient elements certainly to be sure, and I think this is why this is going to tie into my question. No, I'm actually going to leave that until a little bit later, but I'm going to go with coming from a background of mythology. He was a man who studied mythology, and he was an
Oh yeah, yeah.
authority
He
on it.
Oxford professor. Thank you very much.
Yeah, I think
And a lot
when
of and a big from what I understand, like, being an Oxford professor, even now, is a pretty big thing in the social classes. Like back when he was growing up,
Hmm.
like you couldn't be like some random Joe who like got a lot of money or like trained hard, from what I understand, right?
Yeah.
I don't really understand the class system, but like I would think maybe you would know more.
Well, universities, especially before now, have a lot of and had a lot of gatekeeping, so that's not at all surprising. I mean, and plus, they are a prestigious academic institution. Um, so the point is that there comes that is when are you coming at it from an academic perspective, or are you
No, what I
coming?
was gonna say is like Tolkien kind of wrote, like talking about postmodernism, all this world building,
Mhm.
that like Tolkien like kind of wrote for a literate audience, and back then it was less common, even though his books have been translated into different languages. And honestly, I agree with Keeley that it's that Tolkien's Lord of the Rings is at its core a scholar's exercise, and I don't think there's necessarily anything wrong with that. But another tenet of postmodernism is that because looked at least as a of a stage of development in human history, that because there are so many literate people in the world now, and they try to also intermix this with perspectives, and usually it's perspectives of minorities, so the black perspective, Hispanic perspective, irregardless of what everybody thinks about it, that because that with like modern world building, because everyone's literate, and because Tolkien made it okay to make these very long epics that are 500 pages, even though I would say for Tolkien that he actually justified it, that it's much more common now, and that like where is it going with this? That it's much, yeah, it's not only is it more like it's less unique because people have done that, but people can read stuff into the text, I guess is what I'm saying, is like they kind of like
I'm sorry, you lost me a little bit.
oh yeah.
So what are people reading into the
I
text?
think what I was getting at, I guess what I'm saying is like because more people are literate now, like it makes work like that look less unique. But like going back to like the detail thing, like because like people are so literate, like it's not like, oh look, I wrote 1,500 thing. It's like, isn't that great? It's like, well, look, everyone's literate now. It's like, like I'm saying, like now we're in the postmodern era. It's like not necessarily like the words are better. I mean, I remember reading somewhere that in 2004, because of that yearly, the number of data the computers put out, like it wasn't like useful data to humans, but like it like pumped out enough data that all of humanity had written at the time up to that point yearly, and is like exponentially like being produced. Because there's more computers obviously every year.
Okay, so
An interesting tidbit there, so,
okay,
if
so
anything.
so so the topic is that it gets lost in signal to noise ratio. Okay, so let's unpack that a little bit. All right, so signal to noise ratio. Signal to noise ratio is going to be an issue in any undertaking. It just is. It's like how we have way more one hit wonders than we ever have before in music, because there
Because
is
more and more people can do it now.
yes, there is less
Yeah, I think that's
gatekeeping.
what I'm getting
There's
at. Sorry, I'm like interrupting a lot, but
no,
it's
you're
like
all
I think that
right, but my thing is my argument is gonna be like, yeah, we have more um it's like, yeah, we have one direction, but has one direction replaced the Beatles? No. It's
in terms of popularity, but again, this is like the thing with mass culture, and this is what J.G. Keeley gets in, is that like something being popular doesn't make it good. This is
well,
why like he thinks that Harry Potter is so overrated. It's a product.
okay,
Lord
here
Dunstan's King Elflo's Daughter is obviously better than Harry Potter, but it's not a mass product. It didn't have the budget of Harry Potter. I don't think it could sell to Harry Potter because it's not the lowest common denominator. Well, not Harry Potter isn't, but it's just not, it's not made for a mass audience.
uh,
Not everyone's gonna get it.
here's my comeback. Well, here's the thing, because if you're saying so the problem is that your argument here is uh, the, we've achieved an oxymoron in the middle. So is the Lord of the Rings a mass product, or is it a niche
No,
product? Because so far we said it's a niche product, then we've said it's a and then we've moved on to saying it's a mass market product. Just because something is popular, I agree. Just because something is popular does not mean it has great artistic value.
I think
But
it'd
if
be no, no.
something is
What I'm saying
popular
is
and has remained popular, then there should be an explanation of why it's popular. And
no. Here's what happened.
secondly,
It changed. It changed. It actually changed with taste. It started out with something really that was surprise Tolkien when it became popular. It he actually said that he was annoyed in the 1960s with fans from California calling him in the middle of the night for lore questions.
that would
Um,
annoy me too. If anybody reads my book and calls me the Lord question, I will not answer.
the
Wait for the sequel. Wait for the World Compendium. There'll be a World Compendium someday.
official guide to I forget the
It's
name.
okay. It'll cost $20.
Yeah, get like the coffee table book at Barnes and Noble.
Ooh, I've always wanted to have a coffee table book. Sorry, sorry. Back to the topic.
Do you have a shipping policy though? Character shipping.
Oh, character shipping. I mean, you can tell
Yeah.
me about it. If it doesn't happen in the book, it doesn't happen. So I mean, it's I don't know who
So
you.
you're not gonna be like J.K. Rowling Twitter and like
No, oh
uh,
my word, no. Holy
Ron's
cow.
secretly an alligator.
Ron, there are moments when you wonder, man, maybe she really was churning him out and didn't write the story she wanted to write.
Thanks for telling this all after the
Then
movies.
here's like, somebody should be making live edits to the book as she types.
The George Lucas of fantasy.
The George Lucas of YA fantasy.
It's remind me of that Studio C video how like I wanted to have Chewbacca and Leia's bikini and have like an Ewok as a lightsaber.
No, I was thinking of the Studio C one where they're all going into the story joint, and it's like, hi, I would like a
Oh,
story. White, young, has incredible powers. He doesn't understand. And then and it's like George Lucas, and behind him is J.K. Rowling. She goes, yes, yes, I'll have one of those too. Receives an injury from his greatest enemy. Yes, exactly. There you go.
grew up
See,
with his uncle and an orphan. I
yeah,
mean,
I I say I did appreciate Harry Potter. I have read Harry Potter. I like it. It's charming. It is well written, and you're right. It isn't a. It's meant not to be. It's not a
it's not
neat.
art.
I disagree. I think it still is art. I think even if something is, it depends. If something is created strictly for commercial value, then I would say that's not. But it was. She
That's probably
wrote
why
that.
you're less into Marvel, right?
Yeah, no, I'm not really into Marvel. That's
Okay,
not necessarily the reason. I'm just not a big superhero person. I just never
okay.
have been. Uh, because as much as my Pathfinder players yell at me a lot, but my constant line is, I don't want you to be freaking superhumans running around smashing down walls. I want you to be relatively average people doing extraordinary things. Why? Because that is great drama. The Avengers isn't great drama. It's, oh, we have insane powers and everything else is just sort of happening. Our our inner party conflict that becomes world changing because we, like, not through any great effort of our own, because of being special, we don't get any more powerful, we don't get any less powerful, we just kind of, it's like you start, it's like starting a D&D campaign at 20th level and never getting stronger or getting weaker, and then just the entire world is forced to move along with your whims.
I mean,
Sorry.
I guess so. No, that's a good point. No, but going back to what you said about Lord of the Rings sticking around,
Oh my word! There we go. There's the topic.
yeah,
Ish.
that's because Lord of the Rings has changed. They become movies. They got changed fundamentally. They were more action heavy. It's like my one. I didn't really agree with him, but my one. It had a chapel at my college, which is basically like a seminar you're forced to attend. So there's a speaker, yeah. So like the speaker was like, "Oh, like I read the books of Lord of the Rings. Like where's like the songs and the myth, the mythology, and the lore is, and like goes all these focus on battle scenes. Because why is that? Because the '80s happened, the '90s happened. We got into action movies and Star Wars broke special effects, and it basically changed. And that's another thing of postmodernism is remix culture, the meme of taking things and deconstructing them and putting them together and smishing them together. And we got fan fiction, and we can make everything we want. And again, that has to do with the era of postmodernism. Everyone's literate, so they can write fan fiction, and we can just reconstruct, deconstruct. We can make it however we want. And now we're getting another remake by Amazon. It keeps on changing. It's a sellable product. It's because it became a product after, and it really, I think Christopher Tolkien was a genius giving the rights to Peter Jackson like he did. It was like one of the best things he ever did for his family.
So here is the question I have to ask you. So does the meaning of the
That is a
text?
word.
Yes,
That's our new word. Our new
meaning. A
word.
new word is meaning. Meaning this. No, it's okay. So, does the meaning of the text changed? Here's the thing: does the meaning or value of the text changed based on culture?
Yes, because that is why I can watch an anime and not understand why a guy is falling asleep at his chair after working after 16 hours.
So that
Uh,
so that to you, so then therefore that media, so therefore art has a changing value.
well, this is where I slightly disagree with the postmodernists because I don't think that the author is dead and that the meaning is only up to the viewer. I think I can go back, I can read about the context it was made, and I can understand it through that. But at the same time, the media isn't static; it gets changed. And say The Hobbit, things had to be changed. Like I also wrote in my notes that certain things got changed because of the Lord of the Rings. I believe that the only reason The Hobbit got made into a live action movie at its budget with the people that was in it because of Lord of the Rings. It's dependent on it. You could have, if you did try to write a fairy tale of the rings, which I believe Jackson could have done, it wouldn't have happened. People probably wouldn't have gone and see it. It's involved. It evolved The Hobbit as well as the Lord of the Rings.
So to carry on that line of questioning, okay, so I believe that. So then, do you believe that the only so you would disagree that I don't disagree that I don't disagree that the Lord of the Rings movies are a product. I don't disagree. Nor
All
do I
right.
disagree that I think the
And so The Hobbit, it's just what's happened, and I think
yeah,
yeah.
no, I think the Lord of the Rings project of art that became incredibly marketable. I think that The Hobbit is open corporatism. The only reason you're making that is to make money because it didn't need to get made. It didn't want to get made. It was not suitable to get made into what it was. I think so. I don't disagree with that, but I disagree that it should change, or I disagree that perception of it should at all in any way change how we accept the original book, nor should the fact that more people can write fantasy now. I mean, here's the
No,
thing.
I'm just
It's
saying
like,
that's changed people's perceptions. I'm saying that is the at least at very least a cultural touchstone. So like if I'm in China, that might be the first time I ever know what the Hobbit is. You know, and that's why it's remained popular. Like there was, if you look at the Lord of the Rings before the movies, there was a fan base. There's a lot of hippies in the '60s in the United States who liked it. The Beatles were big fans.
well, indubitably.
But then the books came, and then it became mainstream. It's kind of like the hipster effect in a way. Like you got a hipster, in hipster like Jackson, who makes it popular, and then it becomes trickles down from there. It's like, oh my gosh, I want to read the books. Da, 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 da.
Though I would say the amount of people who have read the books is significantly smaller than the amount of people who have watched the movie.
Exactly. That is what I'm saying.
Therefore, I
And
think
that's
that
why you could get away with the Hobbit that you got away with in 2012.
there
And
and not
to
have
interrupt you,
people. Yeah.
freak out? Well, of
Yes.
course, yeah, because like they don't know what the heck is a Hobbit. It's a book from 1938. But also, just to quickly add something, is a lot of people believe that because of the recession in 2008, that Hollywood has been more franchise happy because they're more marketable. People are
Yes.
going to like put down money for something that is more uh like less static and less recognizable. Like that's why you had Marvel be more the take of the 2010s in the 2000s, even though you had Dark Knight, Batman Begins, yada yada yada. So I also think that the movie industry encouraged The Hobbit to be what it is.
Also, when was the last time you saw a new actor not introduced next to a superstar?
Exactly. They can't afford them to go on their own
Right,
platform.
like that's what I was thinking about when they made 42, the Jackie Robinson movie, and it was
Yeah.
sort of like what's the guy who played Jackie Robinson's name?
I don't even know.
Is it Chadwick Boseman? Is that the guy? I think it's the guy. I'm sorry, I'm completely blanking on his name. But like he was relatively unknown, but he's a really good actor. And like they introduced him next to Harrison Ford. I don't know, for some reason that one just like popped into my head. But I'm thinking like if you're bringing somebody who's like relatively unknown, like, and it was a good movie. It was a really good movie. So I'm just like wondering like because like you're undertaking something that is sort of a product that like people don't know about a lot. Like I'd say like our generation doesn't know about. Like they never
Yeah.
experienced like they would not have known, Jackie, they would not have, ever seen Jackie Robinson in public or something like that.
I just had a brilliant
Where am I
idea.
going with this? I don't know. I'm
There's
just
a
rambling.
great book that came out. I think the Matrix kind of reference is called Simulacrum Simulation, and that like how it might have not gone over memes, but like
Oh,
how images are kind
By
of
Baudrillard.
yeah. And I think what his thing was talking about how like
Oh,
images kind of get and ideas get alienated from its original source, so they change and evolve. So like
I hate that book, and I thoroughly disagree with it, but I will happily discuss it if you want me to.
was it discussing what I'm talking about now?
The difference between simulation and simulacra and the levels of isolation from the real thing and how they're just each
Yes.
one is just deepening a lie. I
Yes, because
thoroughly disagree with that way of
did you read
thinking.
that for French
I
philosophy
had
and like
to, yes. I had to read that for school, and I mean, it was fun because everybody, basically everybody except our honors professor really really hated it. So it was basically just 2 hours of just taking a sledgehammer to Baudrillard. Like we really
deconstructing
hate.
Baudrillard? That's actually pretty ironic.
It is ironic because it's it's funny because like when we talk about Freud, we talk about like how many random assumptions that Freud makes.
Yeah, I know.
Baudrillard makes the same number of assumptions and then just goes pages, just page long sentences saying absolutely nothing. And some people think he's a genius, and it's like, and like people always say you either think he's a genius or you hate him. And I happen to be in the latter camp. I think it's literally just some pretentious French guy rambling about nothing.
That actually might have to do with the publishing industry and fans, because I read that a lot of people have like big books. Rich French people stock their homes with big books, and like, well, how do you think they got that big? You know, it's not by hard work.
Sorry, that was an unnecessarily hostile rant.
But I am kind of actually going on a side myself. But like with what Keela was saying is the reason why fantasy is the way it is today, including adaptations of Tolkien's work, is people don't understand the concept. Because the original has been we've been so deviated from the original, we don't understand the context of Tolkien. People don't know that Tolkien was trying to make epics and trying to put all these unnecessary troop movements. Even though I think Jackson did a decent job of cutting all that out to make focus on the action, the story, the main plots, the main the what was at stake, the stakes. But people, I think a lot is lost with that, and like with talking of fantasy in general, like you get the Wheel of Time, you have all these like this, this glut of details that people don't even know why Tolkien put in the first place, or details in The Hobbit when it was even before that it was a fairy tale. I think that's endlessly interesting. It's just like we just focus on adaptation of the whole
Mm.
thing, haven't we? The very process
We
and the
actually
philosophy
have
of it.
because we haven't talked a ton about like because like the the way I think of fantasy is I think of it in that aspect of creative. I think of it in the way because I'm thinking like, are you familiar with the Empire of the Petal Throne?
No,
All right, so the Empire of
sounds
Petal Throne.
pretentious.
The Empire of Petal Throne was similar to Tolkien. It was sort of an American Tolkien.
Did he precede him or what?
Followed him.
Okay,
Though they did work and were alive at similar times.
okay.
It was a professor in Wisconsin, Michigan, something like that. Um, and he constructed this, and he was also a linguist, and he constructed this highly he built his own mythology. He built it based on he started out with sort of the seed of Aztec mythology and let that become a whole fantasy world. And
But here's the thing, just to interrupt you, like going back to what I said, he actually knew his stuff and he knew what he was doing. Like he was building off a myth that he knew. You know, people like sometimes people don't understand that, and I like that.
oh, definitely, I agree. And this is actually, sorry, I can't spoil the question I have because it's a good question. But no, you definitely do see like I think it's the difference between it's people who take fantasy as a pop movement versus fantasy as the
A
human myth.
tradition, a
Yes,
tradition,
it's traditional fantasy versus, and I
pop
think
fantasy.
yeah, and that's where I think you see the difference between Tolkien, who made something, whether or not the academic inquiry is a labor of love, and then turned it into a, I will admit, very dense epic. And it is an epic because it's meant to be an epic. And when I say epic, I don't mean epic. I mean epic as in an epic. As
Like the Edis or Beowulf, or
yeah,
especially
yeah,
Beowulf.
like especially Beowulf. Like the Iliad is a perfect thing. It's like the way that I consider reading Lord of the Rings is I think it's like reading Lord of the Rings is like reading the Iliad and then reading the Iliad and the Odyssey with Edith Wharton's mythology. That's the Silmarillion.
Isn't it interesting, by the way, that we have that the two books that we've well, not the only two books, but some of the biggest books we've recovered from ancient Greece is the Iliad, which is basically a war, and then the Odyssey, which is a journey, and basically that's how fiction kind of comes down to, for the most part.
Yeah, journeys in fiction. That's a very
Journeys and
Freudian.
wars, journeys and
That's
wars,
such a Freudian idea. It really is more of a Jungian idea, but
because it's
yes,
across the world, seen
yeah,
across the world.
it is, no, universal. There are universal things. And tell me, how do you feel about bananas and that lamp behind you, the uncovered lamp behind you?
Your mom.
Whoa. um,
We're
no,
just blowing everybody's minds today.
yes, we
Not
are.
not literally blow. Oh great, now I'm Freud. I mean,
Now you are Freud. Here, have some
yeah.
credit. There you go.
We're having a. It's definitely summer.
It's definitely summer. Speaking of which, it's really hot in here. Wait, where was I? Oh, sorry. I was going. So the fantasy is a tradition, and I think you do see that. Sorry, this is my Empire of the Petal Throne thing. As you see this intense simulation of culture, you see like, and here are here are the men from Troubadour, and they wear these shoes. Why do they have high boots? They have high boots because they live in a land that floods a lot. You
Yeah.
know,
Okay. Yeah, makes sense.
yeah, like stuff like that. But see, there is a difference between I think as an academic inquiry, that's something you write out. Like that's a professor and you saying you write that out, and then there's the artist saying, well, like you don't need to know.
Yeah. Yeah.
It's sort of like the
And I would be
DM.
him. I would be like, what am I saying? Not so much as what am I exploring.
That's true. Because it's almost like to use a D&D analogy. It's like you have your DM notes. The players don't need to see all of them, and I do agree with that to some extent. Like I'm saying, like you don't have to include. Like I like it when it's included, but it doesn't necessarily make it easy to read. So it's like, of course, I'm also thinking about like. So again, there's the divide between Shannara and Lord of the Rings. So Lord of the Rings is it's part of the fantasy tradition, and Shannara is part of the fantasy. And that's another thing. Like when we were at fantasy, sorry, that was a really bad moment. Let's try again. Lord of the Rings is part of like the fantasy tradition because it's built on that same sort of thing. The Empire of the Petal Throne, way less well known, was a kind of a flop of a D&D module because the guy was like, I'm not much of a writer. He's like, oh, but D&D exists. I can use that to make my world a reality. And they kind of made it, and like almost no one played it, and it was so dense that like people were like, Wow. It's sort of like, imagine if there was no Lord of the Rings and all you got was the Silmarillion and notes. That was kind of
No,
Empire of the Petal Throne. Is like, oof. But no, I
it's
do
like fantasy by computer. It really, I mean,
fantasy by database.
no, I mean
That
like if an algorithm like absorbed all these like fantasy novels and tried like oh like go spit out a fantasy novel like gave us that.
yeah. So
It's not human.
yeah, no, I agree, and I think that like you have some of these great works in the past in fantasy that have sort of built up these facades, and we've seen people copying like the amount of fantasy authors who don't understand mythology, who don't understand fantasy, who don't understand magic or even world building to some extent, who don't understand how worlds are built. You see like oh my word, we had somebody who did it, and then everybody goes, well, I can do it too. And as much as I am happy that more people are literate now, I'm legitimately happy that the
Oh,
world's a
me
better
too. Yeah.
place. World's a better place because of that. But you're right, the lack of speciality. Sometimes, like, that's why we have built-in class protections in Dungeons and Dragons. Like, it's like,
Don't mess with that. Has already been established well.
yes, yeah, it's sort of like, this is a thing. It's like, oh well, I'm not going to take the. Well, it's like, well, okay, so elves are good, orcs are bad. That's all we need to know. But what if it weren't the same? World of Warcraft. What if really the elves are kind of the bad guys, or what if the orcs are kind of the good guys, and what if
It's kind
everybody?
of like a spirit of deconstruction too.
Yes, it's almost like we've seen like great, and like there have been legitimately great things done since. And but just like there's one thing that I realized, like, I love that things are more accessible, but accessibility also a lot of times means watering stuff down.
Yes.
And like it's so hard to find a balance, because I do agree with you, and I think that, wow, there are parts of the Lord of the Rings that are definitely like, this really could have used some narrow, like, how about some dialogue? Some dialogue would be really nice. I think
I
wasn't it?
might have excused it though if like Tolkien was as good as a writer of prose as Peake or Dunsany, because when Peake, but even Peake and Dunsany, I feel like they kind of have like goals. It's like, you know, Tolkien's like, oh, look at the trees, but like Dunsany would be like, you're dreaming the trees.
You're dreaming the trees, son. I I I I don't know for sure about Peak. I'm still making my mind up about Peak.
That's fine. That's fine. You don't. It's a 500-page book.
Yeah,
Peake is
I
also technically not fantasy, but
yeah,
gothic fiction.
I do think there's something to be said, that I think Dunsany was definitely a better master of prose, I think, than
Yeah.
Tolkien. I do concur. Um, I do think that Tolkien has better characters, though. Tolkien writes better characters than,
Yeah.
like as much as I
I think
love
you're actually
Dunsany.
right.
Yeah, no, as much as I love Dunsany, it's just like Dunsany's just like pros running through a meadow, and and Tolkien stopped and go, no, 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 noting all the flowers, and there's this small blue flower and this blue flower, and Dunsany's just like, colors, kaleidoscope, sound, music, unicorn. Wait, there's a story happening, isn't there? There,
It's like drunk Irishman versus like boring English professor.
it's your English grandpa versus your crazy Irish cousin on, like, tripping with an
On
N.
LSD and like swarms at the
Yeah,
same time.
yes, that's the difference. So
Wow.
that's quite a journey.
Insulting people or just like or what reading fantasy.
No, that was just a journey. That's all.
Okay.
All right. I mean, my thoughts about the Hobbit are generally wrapped up in all that we said. It's
Me too, but I wrote on here in my notes to watch the 1977 version instead, which I have not done. Do you recommend it? Have you watched it?
I have not watched it. We should watch it together. That is the one that I do know that.
Ralph Bakshi did that movie. The guy who did like Fritz the Cat, like the first
Yes.
furry porn movie.
Yes. Also, who's the voice of Smaug in that? I know who it is. He plays cowboys usually, which I thought was
John
really.
Wayne?
No, it wasn't John Wayne, but I forget who it
That would
was.
have been weird.
It would have been weird, but I really liked that idea because there was a Matt Colville video where Matt Colville talks about like and you see like not all fantasy has to be the genteel, the British, the not every Smog should be Benedict Cumberbatch. It was sort of like so we played clips from that, which like Smog is just like I see you, thief. It's like it's this guy's normal voice, and it's like yeah, no, like not everything needs to be. So it's
It's a
sort of like
Square. I'm sorry, I was just gonna say it's a Square Enix method to just have like every character be a different accent, like in your book too, I think.
Uh, mine, well, mine has the same excuse that I think Tolkien does, is that they're all speaking a different language, and they just happen to be translated into English.
I gave Christy like a British accent, but I gave Ram and uh Tabitha Scottish accents. In my mind, sounds like Shrek, and in my mind, Tabitha sounds like this one Scottish cat girl in Xenoblade Chronicles 2.
Mm,
So I just went along with that because I heard the voice acting before.
mm.
So
Tabitha was always somewhat. Tabitha was always put in to be sort of Scottish. In my head, Christie's always just been straight American,
oh,
just
okay. Well,
straight up, just no accent whatsoever. I don't know why. All right, are you ready to move on to questions?
yes.
Awesome. I'm going to go first. Based on your knowledge of the stories, the Broken Sword and The Hobbit have drawn a lot of comparisons. Not necessarily for their content, but because of their authors' interests, the way in which their authors wrote, their common ties to mythology, uh, and sort of their length. So I would say, which do you think would make a better adventure, like RPG adventure, D&D adventure? Which
Here's the thing. I think the Broken Sword is more comparable to the Fellowship of the Ring. They came out the same year,
okay,
and yes, they did have similar mythological roots. And but I don't know. Like I think maybe Broken Sword would be more playable, especially with today's technology. I like how it's like more of a real world feel. Like it's the real world.
mm.
So like maybe that'd be
There
more
are real
familiar to
places.
people. There are what?
There are real places in the world. Like
Yeah. I don't know. Like I think you could like have more fun with the Broken Sword because it's kind of like more like American Gods. Like it's like from by Neil Gaiman. Like you have like real people interacting with real gods and stuff like that. You have like the Nordic elves, and you had like the Irish. Well, I don't want to ruin it for you, but they have like Irish mythology interactions and stuff like that. I don't know.
Irish
I
Nord.
would think it'd be like more interesting, like to see that just with the everyone knows Lord of the Rings in Middle Earth, but they don't know this broken sword, and it'd be like kind of cool to be like have all this real world mythology and all that. I don't know. Do you
Broken.
agree?
I am. I'm interested because like a lot of people I've seen multiple people online use The Hobbit as sort of a guideline for an ideal classic. Like when I say classic, note classic, like as in classic D&D, like early D&D thing. It says you get together the big party. You have the dwarves. You have this kind of like sandboxy stumbling through. You have the thief. Your goal is to steal treasure. You don't have like some sort of like
Yeah, it wouldn't be a simple one. I would say that it would be like I'd probably bias because I just played Final Fantasy VII. It's like yeah, like with that with tabletop, yeah, you can just like mess around it, but also you had a goal in Hobbit. You would have to at least have that planned with the DM.
true. You're right. You would have to have. You say like, hey, it's like we have it's be you and you a wizard and like 15 dwarves. Sounds like fun. I don't know. I do like the idea of the Broken Sword by Paul S. I feel like that'd be a fun adventure because you could just point to real places in the world. That's cool.
Yeah,
That is cool because it's so mythologically connected.
you can also do sort of like a Clash of Empires game with like
Like
like who has like
Civilization,
what?
like you could run like real time strategy.
Yes,
Yeah,
a strategy game. That's what I mean.
you definitely could. I would recommend that you guys. Jim Murphy runs something really similar. I don't know if you know who Jim Murphy is, but Jim Murphy, he has a YouTube channel. He ran a D&D campaign for many years called Albion that has
Hmm.
some. noticeable similarities to the Broken Sword. I think that's pretty cool.
Interesting. I'd
Uh,
say read the full thing before comparing it because it gets interesting at the end.
yeah,
That actually might be our next podcast episode,
it
or
actually
not.
very well might be. It is. I will say for those of you who have heard this and it seems like you want to read it, it is significantly darker than The Hobbit.
It's Tolkien times too, but yeah,
It's
but with the
infinitely
Lord of the
darker.
Rings, is it darker than Lord of the Rings? I'd say maybe on this a little bit of the same.
Lord of the Rings does not include creepy mind rape at the beginning.
Oh yeah, I
Yeah, you
forgot
forgot
about
about that,
that.
didn't you? Creepy mind control. Ugh, that's yeah, no, that it establishes pretty quickly what elves are and what elves aren't.
I thought it was interesting that I guess we're gonna might have to cut this out. Like some elves like work with the gods, but they're atheists.
It's
Never got.
like, and also as another thing, like right at the beginning, it's like oh, the gods are real. I just don't worship them. It's like how's that working out for you? All right, sorry. Your question.
When and how did your journey with fantasy start?
Ooh, I like that. I think that I always kind of liked fairy tales, but I like fairy tales, but neither of my parents were like super big into fantasy. Um, so we didn't like read that many fantasy books. I remember reading what are those? You remember G.A. Hinty?
No.
Okay, so G.A. Hinty is he was an Englishman, I think. And he wrote a lot of exciting books for young men of character. Like
Yeah,
they were
like the
like
Hardy Boys
it was sort of like it
or
was like the
whatever.
historical, much darker Hardy Boys. Like
Oh
here like
gosh.
Beric the Briton was like about a a British guy who like served in the court of Boadicea.
Is it trying to be historical or is
Yeah,
it more like Conan the Barbarian?
imagine like if Billy Graham wrote Conan the Barbarian. No, not even that, because they weren't like they were never
Oh,
explicitly
like the
like.
Dunlop books. Those Dunlop books that I have,
Yeah, they're kind of like that. Like they aren't like
but British.
yes, they're like they're
Are they like George MacDonald? Like kind of feel like a sermon or what?
no, not like that. They're like they're kind of slow paced historical adventures. Like they're like historically like mostly accurate and stuff, but like they could also like partially serve as history lessons, but they'd be historical fiction, maybe even bordering on historical fantasy. Like
Okay.
there's one about
So you started with those.
I started with those, and I wasn't a huge fan of them. I thought they were actually really boring. I still do, um, but I was like, okay, so like I moved past that, but then I got I don't know, oh, his name just went out of my head. Is it Jim Davis? Jim Jim
The guy who did Garfield?
No, not that guy. Jim. Oh, what is his name? There was this gentleman that I knew. My dad knows. He did. He's
And
the
Harvey,
guy.
the guy for Hardy Cedars,
No,
or
the guy from Chap. He used to do. He used to tell stories on CD. He was a storyteller, professional storyteller. Jim.
I think I know who you're
You
talking
know
about.
who I'm
What?
talking about? Tall, skinny guy, slightly balding. Yeah,
But what did he do?
So he did a book of Irish fairy. He did a narrated story of Irish fairy tales, and I loved those. And there was a book of Arthurian fairy tales that he did, and I listened to those, and I loved those. And I'm like, wow, this is so cool. So I used to really I used to listen to those a lot, and as I got older, I'm like, this is pretty cool. But I tried I tried to read the Iliad for school. I hated it. Hated the Iliad. Uh,
I did it too, honestly. I
I
could.
hate. See, I like the parts of the Aeneid I've read. I think the Odyssey is more interesting, but
Yeah,
wow, the Iliad is just
hard to
holy
keep track of.
cow, it's boring. Yeah, no. So I tried that and I kind of bounced off it. But then because of that, I had to read Edith Wharton's mythology for Latin. I took Latin for a lot of years, and I
In
loved.
Latin?
Yeah, no, I didn't have to read it in Latin because it wasn't in
Oh,
Latin. But I did have to. We had to translate parts of the Aeneid. into English
Wow.
from Latin, and that was fun. I actually enjoyed that. So I like the Aeneid, and so we had to read Edith Wharton's mythology, and that's a great book. So I read that, and so I'm like, okay. And then I bought it, and I've read it many times since, and I love it. It's such a good book. So it's a lovely book. And so that kind of got me deep into mythology. My first really experience with fantasy was reading Brian Jakes' Redwall. Um, I've read probably, I think I've read every Redwall book except the last two at least 3 times each.
Whoa.
Actually, no, I can't guarantee I've read The Bellmaker more than twice. But I love those books. They aren't high fantasy or anything. They're actually
I
rather,
read two of them too,
yeah,
so I would know.
they're low fantasy. They're pulpy. They're filled with fuzzy animals disemboweling each other.
Good fun for
Good fun,
children.
good fun. That series is responsible for many things in my life. But I think my love of fantasy is probably the biggest one. So between that and that, I eventually started to read. Also, I used to listen to Chronicles of Narnia all the time on tape. Focus on the family radio theater. This has been David Suchet. David Suchet. That was cool because David Suchet.
Did it have like uh, Kenneth Branagh and like C.S. Lewis's son on there? Is like
No,
so
no,
great.
it was usually David Suchet. Elizabeth Council was in most of them.
Yeah.
Uh, I and I and the narrator. The narrator was really good. Um, I forget who his name. I forget his name now, but I love those. Those were very well done. So I listened to those time and time again, and so between those two things, I kind of had a very I was very much into the British fantasy tradition, the classic British fantasy tradition, and I read The Hobbit, and I really liked The Hobbit, and that was like a lot of fantasy books I ended up reading aloud. Like I read The Hobbit aloud with my mother,
Oh.
and that was we really enjoyed that book. We had fun with that one. We tried to read Lord of the Rings. We did not get through it. It was after she it was said that she fell asleep somewhere in the middle of the House of Elrond. We were just like, nah, now we ain't doing this. But we had a lot of fun. So that was sort of my love. I think my favorite fantasy book. I don't know what my favorite is, but that's how I started, and eventually I got into. I didn't really rediscover fantasy until like college, and George MacDonald was what got me back into fantasy. Sort of the nobility of the fairy tale. Sorry, back to you.
Oh
Back.
yeah. That back to you. Actually,
Oh,
answering your
actually, okay.
second question.
Okay, so here is my question. Do you think that Norse mythology is the most underrated mythology in Western culture? It's been so influential in our fantasy tradition, yet we still mainly focus on Roman mythology, or rather Romanized Greek mythology, rather than Norse mythology or even Anglo-Irish mythology, which have arguably had more influence on our modern Western epics.
I really don't know. I really know nothing about it. I know you wrote this because you're interested in it, but I
Sorry.
really don't know anything about. No. Um, I know the Silmarillion takes a lot from it. Like I know, like there's like been parallels with Odin and Ilúvatar or whatever. And
Iluvatar, yeah.
but other than the Silmarillion, I really don't know. I'm sure it's been influential. Like Thursday is Thor's Day, and other things like the Day of Thor. Like I'm sure there's a lot of connections with like our culture in ways that we just don't know yet that I don't know.
Hmm.
So you're probably right, but like I really don't know. I haven't taken time to read it, and I don't know if I ever will, or at least
Okay.
anytime soon.
Okay. And your question for me?
As a Pokemon fan, what is your overall opinion on the new Detective Pikachu movie?
Ooh, I haven't seen it.
Okay.
Um, I'm a little weirded out. I want to know. Okay, so my curiosity as a Pokemon fan has been, how the heck do tournaments work? Like, how does the sport of Pokemon actually like
I
work?
I think he banned it the mayor or whatever because violence is evil and this and that, or
I,
in the
I
movie.
I don't know. I like the idea of a detective. Yeah, it'd be fun to see exploring a different element of the Pokemon world, and I think despite my worst fears, the Pokemon are actually cute. They actually succeeded in not making them horrifying, which I think is cool.
They're all fuzzy though, most of
Yeah,
them.
I'm okay with that. But like I will definitely go see it. I mean, I certainly don't expect it to like change necessarily how I viewed the series so much. Nor does it answer my great question of like, how does the tournament life work? Like, why is Ash so bad? Like, are there other ways to qualify between besides winning 8 badges? I mean, there has to be for all these thousands of people to qualify. Sorry, now I'm just rambling. All right, well, I think that sums up my opinion. Do you have any parting thoughts for our dear viewers?
Um, watch the Hobbit cartoon, but don't read Smoker and Simulation.
Amen. All right, have a good night, Internet.